that around, and I'd like to genuinely ask you, what do men want?
Nobody deals with any of the really valid issues. And then you get a bunch of anger, and you get a bunch...
She said, oh, I'm going to go do a sweat lodge this evening. And I begged her to take me along, and that was about 6 years ago.
Welcome to Speaking of Men. This is public access television for Albuquerque, New Mexico. I'm your host, Mike Rivas. Our guest today is Barry Cooney, editor of Man Alive. Please stay with us. We're going to be right back. Welcome back to Speaking of Men. I'm your host, Mike Rivas, and we're speaking today with Barry Cooney, who is editor-in-chief of Man Alive. It's a journal of men's wellness here for the land of enchantment. And our topic today, basically, is whether there is a men's movement existent in America or not, whether this is a trend and a fad that a lot of white Anglo-Saxon Protestant middle-class fellows are taking a look at, or is this something here to stay? So I hope you'll stay with us. We have that in a few shorts you might be interested in. Welcome back, Barry.
Thanks,
Good
Mike.
to see you. Is there a men's movement, and is it here to stay?
It's a more difficult question than one would think, Mike. I would say, is there a men's movement? No, there's not a men's movement. There are many men's movements. What those of us who are involved in men's activities discover is that there are lots of things going on around the country. Some aren't very sophisticated, and some are well along in what they're doing. So right now it's a jumble. And very much of a jumble, but it's in embryonic form.
Mm-hmm. What do you think, now you, in your bio, you've been active in men's issues or looking at men's wellness for the better part of 8 years. I've been trying to look at myself personally in getting some kind of a better lifestyle as a man for 4 or 5. So what do you think there's some common issues that men share that we might talk about a little bit? What do you have?
Well, I think the best way to answer that question is to kind of trace how the men's movement became a movement here in New Mexico. For my own self, I was discovering that my father was near death from cancer, and I was discovering that many of my characteristics were mirror images of his characteristics.
Like father, like son.
Emotionally uninvolved, losing contact with any male friends, unable to express and deal with emotions, ineffective in my relations with women, and so on. And one day in Santa Fe, a bunch of us were meeting, a bunch of men, and we were talking, just a handful of us, and we discovered that we all shared similar backgrounds with either emotionally or physically absent fathers. So we basically said, you know, we should talk about these things. And a group of us got together and went up to a place called Glorieta, which is the conference center, north of Santa Fe. And that first year, 17 of us met. And we had no idea at the time that that was the beginning of what is now known as the New Mexico Men's Wellness Movement, which involves about 70 men's networks, men's support groups networking throughout the state. It involves a quarterly journal, which I edit. It involves an anthology of men's poetry, annual conferences, just many, many things.
That's great stuff. So this has been going on for a while. This is the media is beginning to catch a little bit of it and focus on some of it, but it's not new stuff for a lot of men.
Right. I think what is new is the fact that the media is getting much more information to deal with, and it doesn't quite know what to do with it. So a lot of the images about what this business of men's movement is all about are highly distorted.
Do you think that the Journal Trib gives an unbiased or a fair? Do you think that there's an attempt by media to give an in-depth look or an unbiased look at what men are trying to do, or do you think there's you think they keep it surface and caricature a lot?
Unfortunately, I think to date that much of the coverage has been very surface level, not only here in New Mexico but nationally as well. There have been attempts to uncover what men are attempting to do, but right now I think people are more interested in catching little glimpses and snatches of what they think might be media worthy or what they might be glitzy enough to consider a topic that would attract the attention of readers.
Right. I think that the women's movement fell victim to that a tremendous amount. They were able to reduce the issues and the people involved to caricatures, and then they were able to discard them and not have to deal with any of the in-depth. I know we had the people from the Rape Crisis Center on here in Albuquerque, which was founded in the early 70s. You know, I mean, you've been doing this for 8 years, but I mean, a lot of women have been active for 20 years in this program, and I'm still not certain that America has any greater understanding of what the real issues for them are than they do for us. So,
well, you know, I think in large measure that's because of the fact that North American culture, I believe, is a very shallow culture. It's a culture of sound bites. It's a culture of brief media clips, and I think what we're dealing with right now is trying to forge through those improper images and really get to the heart of the matter, what male consciousness is all about.
Male consciousness is certainly what we're here to talk about. Let's pause for just a moment and take a look at our weekly clip from Parent Craft. Please stay with us. We'll be right back.
Give lots of praise for effort as well as accomplishment. Look for achievement even in small tasks and praise your child often. Also, let your child know that trying hard is even more important than winning.
Welcome back to Speaking of Men. I'm your host, Mike Rivas. This is Public Access Television for Albuquerque, New Mexico. We're talking today with Barry Cooney, and he's editor-in-chief of Man Alive, which is the definitive newspaper for men's issues or journal for men's issues here in New Mexico. We're talking about conscious manhood and stewardship and responsibility and taking our lives seriously, each individual taking his life seriously, of looking at mentorship and initiation and being involved and coming down and being in this world. Why don't you talk about that a little bit for us?
Well, first of all, those are all nice words, but I don't think many of us know what they mean. I think one of the things that we as men have to acknowledge is that in many instances we're being exploited by the social system. We're being exploited because of the stereotypes that we feed off of about what it is like to be a man. You know, we're not all Sylvester Stallones or Arnold Schwarzeneggers, but somehow we're supposed to perform like we are. We're supposed to withhold emotion, take on the world's responsibilities in isolation, and at the same time be effective parents and effective as leaders. But what we're discovering is that we as men have difficulty communicating with one another because we're too involved in playing out the social stereotypes of the market exchange society. So we become really puppets, social puppets. And when men get together, they really relate, for the most part, in very superficial ways, because to relate in any other way makes them vulnerable. And so the stereotype says you can't be vulnerable. Also, there's a spirit of competition that is distorted. I'm interested, Mike, I was interested in finding out that the word competition comes from the Latin competere, which means to strive together. So we've lost concept entirely of what it is to be competitive as men in terms of striving together. And in many ways, what hasn't been acknowledged is that men have become victims. And the men's movement, if you will, is an attempt to redefine masculinity, to take another look at manhood, to take another look at social responsibility, and also to take another look at the feeling nature of men.
Just to try and be flexible rather than rigid is what it's, to try and do something differently than what's been dealt us as a script.
I think to try and be honest.
Yeah.
When one of the things that I discover in doing men's workshops around the country is that as soon as men can get comfortable with one another, one of the first things that surfaces is grief. All the grief that men have within them and that they bury, that they suppress.
Bly says that the key to the deep masculine men is grief, that's the universal for men for feeling, and that's a major part of the male mode of feeling is grief. It's kind of a world grief that men carry.
I think there's the other side of it too, and that is men in the act of free play too. Very, very frequently, once we enter the competitive workaday world, we as men really lose the ability to play.
Yeah. Well, you know, part of what you're saying brings to mind for me one of the universal stories, which we're all familiar with, of I think in Aesop's fable, and the Indians also use it, where the man takes one stick and breaks it, but a bundle of sticks can't be broken. Men isolated, which this society tends to do, and the lifestyle tends to isolate us, it's pretty hard for us to be consciously active. And it's very disempowering. And there is an empowerment in sharing life with other men and in sharing goals and directions with other men. And it's this kind of empowerment that I look for, you know, because I need that to face the world as it is, and to know that I'm not alone out there. I know one of the things Bly said at the end of the workshop was that, you know, this is not television you're watching, guys, as we are right now for a lot of people, television. These are real issues. This is real life stuff. It has to do with our hearts and souls, and we need to go back out and continue to journal and continue to work on that. Anything else on that? You have anything to say on empowerment? I'd be interested in knowing, you know, because this falls into mentorship and initiatory practices are in empowerment. Robert Moore, who's the fellow that you work with sometimes?
Doug Gillette, who is the co-author of a book that was written by Moore called King, Warrior, Magician, Lover.
Right. That's one of the things those guys talk about, is that men in the shadow are afraid of other men, and men who are in touch with the archetype are empowering of other men. They want all men around them to be strong, and that's an empowerment. You have some things you might be able to say on empowerment?
Well, I think to speak about empowerment, you have to go back and look at how we're initiated as males. If you compare the way we're initiated, or should I say uninitiated, in Western culture to other more traditional societies, you see that other societies recognize that there is a logical point from which a boy becomes a man. And the way that is done is through the boy's involvement with all of the elders in the community, because the elders have things to teach him. So in, say, a traditional African Yoruba society, it's the best axe maker who teaches all the kids how to make axes. It's the best dancer who teaches the kids how to dance. is the best hunter, that teaches the male how to hunt. So the responsibility essentially is taken away from the father. In many instances in traditional cultures in male initiation, the father is just a casual observer to all this, an amused observer.
The uncle is often, I know in Navajo and Hopi traditions, I believe the uncle is oftentimes the one who actually does the initiation and fathering.
Sure, and it takes the responsibility away from the father to be the person who knows it all. And so traditional cultures have a way of involving through not only through educational practice, but through ritual as well, the idea of a boy emerging from a boy to full manhood.
Process of cooking a male is what it gets down to, creating one, putting one in the oven and bringing them into full consciousness.
In a ritualized process which involves all of the men in the community. In one traditional African culture, the boy is literally kidnapped away from the mother. He's forced to fast in the forest for a few days, and when he wakes up, or when he discovers himself there, he's there with a bunch of elders who are in masks and whatnot, and the first thing that's done is the elders let a little of their blood go into a cup, and so the boy drinks of the cup, and what does he learn? He learns that males can give nourishment. He also learns that the knife that's used in the ceremony is not only a weapon, it is a means of facilitating this nourishment. He also learns that he can be protected in the company of older men. That doesn't happen today. That doesn't happen in this culture. This culture supports isolation. It supports men acting as individuals against other men. That's the negative side of competition. It supports men fearing to express themselves honestly, particularly with members of the opposite sex. So you get all of these false images and stereotypes. And what is taking place, basically, is the commercialization of the male image.
The commercialization of the male image.
Sure. Men, in order to learn about men, sit and drink their beer in front of the TV set and look at a Rambo or a Terminator or whatnot. And so they're voyeurs to this process of what a male is. They're not out there doing it. They're just out there replicating the stereotypes. You
know, one of the things and it's real popular in men's movements as an issue, is the fact that the father is supposed to be there to make a clean break between the mother and the boy. And the male is also, the father is supposed to be also there to carry the spirituality. One of the things they point out is that the Aboriginal tribes, the men are, a tremendous amount of their waking time is spent in ritual and in dealing with the spiritual. That a tremendous number of young men growing up, especially in gang activities, it's actually an attempt on their part to father each other and to get this stuff. I'm just absolutely amazed at the doors that are opening in my own consciousness when I begin to try and look at the scripts that have been handed me. And as I begin to sort through some of those and actually give myself the option to discard them, who I might be in this world and the effect that I might be able to have in it, not on a world level, not on the level of being Caesar, but just on the level of the people that I come in contact with on a day-to-day basis. It's amazing to me, the process of learning to become a human being and the process of being able to begin to become a man in America, consciously. A lot of talk about conscious manhood. Got a definition of that, maybe? Conscious manhood.
Well, I think there are a lot of offshoots that arise from that term. One of them, I think, is following the path of the heart, which is something that is talked about in the Castaneda books. Really doing something because it comes from a spiritual center, something that mythologist Joseph Campbell would call living your bliss. When you wake up in the morning, there's a certain excitement that you have to life. There's a certain purpose that you feel that you have. There's a certain centeredness. And
life has a meaning for you.
That you can access a spiritual center.
Mm-hmm.
And the difficulty is that that's not a solitary process. That's a process that has to be fostered through the dynamic interaction with others. And the interesting thing is that there's a lot of talk right now about, well, men are healing themselves, but why aren't they more involved with healing their relationship with women? And I think the answer to that is that they really first have to get some grasp of how deeply mired they are in their own social pathology, in their own illness. Once they really grasp that and start to do something about it, which is what really the men's movement is all about, addressing those issues, then they reach a level where they can effectively begin to dialogue with the opposite sex and in some way try and resolve some of these issues that exist now between men and women.
You can actually have a relationship rather than a joint projection or something. Let's pause for just a moment and take a look at a little tape put together by the Points of Light people. Please stay with us. We'll be right back.
There is a mighty spirit shining out.
In Salisbury, Maryland, the hungry are being fed. In Wind Falls, Indiana, a man who learned to read at 47 is making sure others learn earlier. In Hope, New Mexico, people turned an abandoned school into a thriving community center. In Boston, Massachusetts, neighbors set up a crime hotline that's making their streets safer. From Seattle to Galveston, from Buffalo to Fargo, every day, someone in America is doing something to light up another life. But there is so much more to do. The light to do it is within us all. We only need to share it. Contact the Points of Light Foundation. Do something good. Feel something real.
Welcome back to Speaking of Men. I'm your host, Mike Rivas. This is Public Access Television for Albuquerque, New Mexico. Our guest today is Barry Cooney, who is the editor-in-chief of Man Alive, the journal for men's wellness here for the Land of Enchantment. Barry, we talked about empowerment, conscious manhood, men being with other men. The other part of life for us is women. And I'm wondering if you had some things about how do you think women will be affected by these changes that we're struggling with?
I think initially they might be quite fearful because an empowered male is a male who's asking for what he wants and expressing what he needs. Certainly not violently. But in the process of doing that, it forces the relationship, which is essentially always a mirrored relationship, it forces the women in the relationship to really say, okay, how am I responding to this, and how have I been socially conditioned? Because women aren't out of the woods either. So a liberation of the male implies that women have to also be aware of their own wake-up calls too, and what they need to do so that there are two healthy people relating to one another.
So this is an opportunity basically for women to put their money where their mouth is and realize that both sexes are struggling, that we as men have heard the complaints that they have about relationships between the sexes and about the oppression they suffered, and accept the fact that a lot of us are open and willing and ready to just attempt. And I think that a lot of times for me, this whole process, all I have in it sometimes is the fact that I am making an attempt, you know, consciously, emotionally, mentally. Nothing else in my life is supporting it, but somewhere in me I know that I'm trying to bring about some kind of change. So perhaps our message to women is we do hear you. We do understand what's happened. We are trying to deal with that, and both sexes are basically flying blind. This is an opportunity for both of us to begin to actually go into some new frontiers in here and approach some new areas that neither of us is probably, neither sex has probably tread in a couple of centuries maybe. So, you know, another thing I'd like to, did you have anything else to say on that?
Well, I agree with what you're saying. I think that there needs to be more public dialogues between men and women on this whole concept of the politics of gender. I know myself and some other people are trying to organize discussions along these lines. What we really need to do is dialogue so that we can really try and arrive at what some of the key issues are now between men and women in relationships, apart from the stereotypes, apart from the overt politics, and really establish some dialogue here.
You bet. Well, I tell you what, we're getting down to the last couple of minutes. Let me just ask you one more thing, and this is something that came up in our talk with the people at Rape Crisis. A lot of us are beginning to realize that men have been victims of sexual abuse also, and that is probably vastly underreported in young people. I think between the ages of birth and about 18 years of age, boys and girls are equally sexually abused, and it's only at that point that the statistics jump. Say something real quick about that, and we'll try to wrap it.
Well, only that I'm absolutely amazed at the conferences I go to how many men report that they have been sexually abused, and it's astounding to me. But they deal with it in different ways, and the mechanisms are just as faulty in many cases as the mechanisms for women dealing with such traumatic incidents. All I can say is that these are critical issues, and we really need the proper formats to really talk about how we're going to deal with these issues in a healthy way.
Let me go ahead and thank you for being here with us today. And let me urge you guys to join Speaking of Men again in the future. Love having you. Remember, you guys and girls out there, men and women, stand if you can, run if you have to, but don't quit. Thanks, Barry. It's good of you to come down here and see us today. This is a real pleasure having you.
My pleasure.